My new novel, Safe Haven, in a lot of ways, it's a novel that I'm not sure I even could have written a few years ago. It's complex in structure, and I could go into all these really boring writer things. But what do you need to know as the reader? And I guess it would be, in many ways, it's what you expect if you pick up a Nicholas Sparks novel. It's got a love story in it. It's a story that's set in a small town in eastern North Carolina. Hopefully they're compelling characters that you find interesting. But additionally, there's a little bit of an added danger element, you might say. In many ways, the novel almost becomes almost a thriller by the end. You know, whenever you sit down, or whenever I sit down to write a new novel, whether it's Safe Haven or any of the previous novels I've written, I'm always shocked by the fact that they are challenging to write no matter how many novels I've written in the past. And I suppose that in writing Safe Haven, that was the most surprising thing. This was a novel that was challenging on any number of levels, whether you're talking about the structure or specific dialogues. Part of that was because I wanted to make it feel very new and very fresh for the reader, but other parts were because I'd never written a novel or even similar to this before that really has this growing sense of impending danger that really begins to dominate the story when, of course, I'm trying to make the love story front and center of the story. So there were a lot of challenges in it. And at the same time, by the end, it was fun to write. I suppose I wrote the last chapters of that book as fast as I've ever written anything in my life. So, like everything, there's challenges, there's joys, and in the end, we'll see. It's a novel that, let's just say, I'll remember writing for a while. All I can say is, I do my best to write the kind of novels that I would like to read. I do my best to create an interesting story. In Safe Haven, for instance, I've tried to create really compelling characters and a page-turning story in a new structure that readers, I think, will be pleasantly surprised with. A few big twists along the way. At the same time, really making the best of a love story, really trying to make that whole development seem as real as possible. So you add in the fact that I try hard, and that there have been a lot of movies and people are familiar with my work, and I think it kind of goes to the fact that love is a universal emotion. It's experienced around the world, and people relate to it, and there are certain segments of the population in every country in the world that want to read about it. I never grew up thinking that I was going to be a novelist. I grew up loving to read, though, and I think that played a big role in eventually becoming a novelist. I remember reading, and I had this wonderful class in college, American fiction since the 1950s, and I read, Catcher in the Rye and Slaughterhouse-Five and Catch-22, all these great books. I read books by John Cheever and Vladimir Nabokov, and I remember reading those saying, wow, this is really great. I just love the voice here. But at the same time, I love the voice of modern authors, let's say Stephen King. And I say, well, if I like this so much, why don't I give it a try? So I just sat down and gave it a try one day. I wrote my first novel at the age of 19 and my second at 22. They went nowhere. And that was okay. I had to settle into life. And then when I was 28, I kind of got the itch to write again. And the novel that came out at that time was The Notebook. It was not, in other words, a sense of destiny or even a compulsion, so to speak. It was more, I guess, to see if I could write a story that I would enjoy reading. And I think really that's where it all came from. I've been fortunate that a number of novels have been adapted into film. I've had The Notebook and Message in a Bottle, Walk to Remember, Nights in Rodanthe, Dear John, The Last Song. I think The Lucky One is filming soon. And then, of course, Safe Haven, my most recent novel, also just got optioned for film. And actually, I'm supposed to serve as a producer on that. And that's always a fun process because, I had my chance to tell the story the way I wanted to tell it in the novel. And that was great. And it's fun to work in a different medium and show the story in a slightly different way, perhaps, because they're very different. A film is a story told with pictures. A novel is a story told with words. So I very much enjoy the process, and I've been fortunate that I've liked the movies that have come out from my novels, and they've all been fairly successful. So I've certainly had more than my fair share of luck with regard to Hollywood. And my role has been really dictated primarily by the studios and how much input they want me to have, whether they want notes on a screenplay or they ask me about different locations. I pretty much do what the studio wants. My fans are great. I get a lot of letters every year. I do my best to answer every one of them, believe it or not. I see a lot of people when I go out on book tours. I give speeches around the country, and there's always people there, and I talk to them. And for the most part, they're terrific people. They tell me why they like the book or what their favorite novel, perhaps, that I've written is, and that's always great to hear. And it's just a lot of fun. I actually learn a lot when I go out there because you learn what people like and you learn which books that you've written in the past really meant something to people. And it's always interesting to hear what people say because it's often not quite what you expect. And, of course, like every author who's been out on tour, you get some memorable events. I remember once I had a woman come up to me at a book signing, and she looked very upset, and I spoke to her for a moment. She said that she'd shown up because her husband had died a couple of days ago. Her husband of 40 some odd years. She was going to the wake that evening. She wanted to come to the book signing first, but she asked me if she could put a passage from the Notebook in his coffin to be buried. And I suppose that's the most memorable thing that's ever happened to me. Whenever I go out on tour, I hit a variety of stores. Barnes & Noble is always among them. In fact, Barnes & Noble is usually 2 of my first 4 stops on tour. And it's always great. These are great stores because they're very roomy, and I tend to have very large crowds. And so we can weave them among the aisles. And they generally have excellent parking, too, which is great, And so I look for... And I choose these stores because I've worked with these people before. They're always the same store managers. They kind of know how to work the system to get people in and out as quickly as possible, because otherwise the lines can get very long. They can stretch up to 5 or 6 hours, and I really start feeling guilty when they get to be that long. I do my best to keep them much shorter, but sometimes you just can't do it. And the staff, of course, at Barnes & Noble is great. They do their best to keep people satisfied even when the wait gets a little bit long. Whenever I sit down to write a new novel, my main goal is to write something that I haven't written before. And there's a lot of different ways to make these novels different. You can add an element of mystery, you can add an element of sadness, you can add an element of war or mysterious characters. There's a lot of different things that you can do. For this one, I just decided to add an element of danger, and you start with that and you say, well, what's dangerous? It could be a person, a place, or a thing. For this, I chose a person, so now there's a dangerous person in it, and that becomes more of a thriller. And that's okay, because primarily I write a love story, and I think that anyone who enjoys my novels will enjoy Safe Haven because it has all the elements that you want. The only difference is there's an element of danger in it. For me, what motivates me primarily is the question of, can I do it again? And can I do it better? And that's really what drives me. And that drives me in virtually every area of my life, whether it's my marriage or whether I started a private school or coached a high school track team. I just wanted to see not only if I could do it, but could I really do well if I gave it 100% effort? And that's what drives me to write the novels that I do. I sit down, I say, okay, this is what I've written. Now, how can I top it? What's next? I don't know. After Safe Haven, I'll probably relax for a little bit as I begin to ponder my next novel. I'll be thinking of that. The Lucky One should be filming, so I'll, of course, be on set for that. I'm serving as a producer for Safe Haven, so I'll be working on that. And, life just keeps turning, but mainly, for me, I'm a novelist at heart, and the most important thing for me after Safe Haven is to come up with a novel that's perhaps even better.